Hey guys, today's lesson is going to be about different factors that affect how populations will grow over time, and we're going to be looking at some of their growth curves. So like I said, we're going to be going over the factors that affect population growth and looking at some of the growth models or the growth curves. We're going to start by going over a couple definitions of carrying capacity and biotic potential. We'll also look at independent and dependent factors. Some of that kind of stuff is going to be review from Bio 20. Then we're also going to look at the difference between K-selected and R-selected species, and then we'll finish off with some growth models. So carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that a habitat can support. Carrying capacity is sometimes referred to as just K for short. A population won't be able to grow much beyond carrying capacity, and there can't be any sustained growth beyond carrying capacity. So that means a population could grow above carrying capacity, but can't stay up there. Biotic potential is the maximum rate of population growth, and that's sometimes referred to by the letter R. Both biotic potential and carrying capacity are limited by a bunch of different factors, and all of those factors are called environmental resistance, the things that limit how quickly a population can grow and how big it can grow. Those environmental resistance factors fall into either the category of density dependent limiting factor or density independent limiting factor. The density dependent limiting factors will limit the growth of a population based on how big the population is. So a more dense population will have stronger limiting factors. So the larger a population grows, the slower its growth rate will be. That also means that in cases where populations are really small and have really low density, these factors aren't going to play a huge role. Density dependent limiting factors include competition, predation, parasitism, and disease. And we'll be talking more about competition, predation, and parasitism in the next lesson. But competition essentially is just any type of competition between individuals for access to resources like food, shelter, sunlight, water, mates, all that kind of stuff. That competition can be interspecific or intraspecific, and individuals that lose will die usually, or will have less reproductive success. So because of that, that slows down the growth rate of the population. Predation is when a prey species is killed by a predator species. Prey species are usually controlled by some type of predation. The larger the prey species, the more predators it can support, and therefore the larger the predator population gets, which then decreases the prey species. And in the next lesson, we will talk about how that works with predator-prey cycles. And then with parasitism and disease, that's anything that's going to directly kill off some of the individuals in the population. And diseases and parasites both spread more quickly the more densely populated an area is. The more spread out the individuals are, the harder it is for them to come into contact with each other and spread disease. It's why right now, while we have a global pandemic going on, everyone is being asked to self-isolate or stay 6 feet apart and stuff like that. The more spread out you are, the harder it is for disease to spread. The more high density or the closer together you are, the more easily disease can spread. That's why they closed schools, because those are very high dense places, high density places. Anyway, density independent limiting factors include things that will hit any population regardless of that population's density. Kind of like if you're in that area, you will be affected regardless of how dense your population is. That includes things like natural disasters, human activity, and climate change. Okay, K and R selected species are two different categories of species that we group or categorize based on how they grow. So K-selected species tend to have populations that are fairly constant and will remain close to carrying capacity unless there's some sort of major disturbance. R-selected species will have populations that fluctuate wildly in size, going from like just a few individuals to like hundreds of thousands, and then a whole bunch of them die off again, and that'll just keep happening. K-selected species tend to have long lifespans. Both the population and the individual grow slowly. Individuals reach sexual maturity later in life. You tend to only give birth to a few young at once, tend to be larger in body size, give lots of parental care. There's also lots of competition, a high survival rate. Most of their death is density dependent factors. Their populations and their ecosystems tend to be fairly stable, and they have something called an S-shaped growth curve. This includes most mammals and birds, including ourselves. And then R-selected species tend to have really short lifespans. The individuals and populations grow really quickly. Individuals reach sexual maturity very, very quickly. You can have hundreds of young at once. The individuals tend to be very small, don't have a lot of parental care, also don't have a lot of competition, also don't survive very long, tend to have density independent mortality. Their population fluctuates quite a bit. Their environments are quite unstable, and they tend to have a J-shaped growth curve. This includes a lot of insects and bacteria. So when we're talking about those curves, what we're talking about is the population growth models. So K species, like we said, tend to have an S-shaped curve, which is like this one here, also called a logarithmic growth or a sigmoidal curve. And then R-selected species tend to have this J-shaped curve that keeps going up until all of a sudden it crashes back down again. That's also called exponential growth. So the logarithmic growth, that's the sigmoidal curve or the S-shaped curve that we see with K-selected species, has a lag phase where growth is fairly slow while individuals are kind of finding other members to mate with, they're adjusting to the environment. Then growth will start happening really quickly. That's the log phase where it starts going up. And then as the population starts to get close to carrying capacity and then reaches carrying capacity, it will level off again, which is the stationary phase. So lag, log, stationary. At the stationary phase, that is when there's just not enough resources in the ecosystem to support more individuals. And at that point, the population is at dynamic equilibrium, and the number of births and deaths will be pretty much the same. There can be what's called an overshoot in a logarithmic population model, where the population does go above carrying capacity for a short period of time. But then obviously that can't be sustained. There's not enough resources for that many individuals to survive in the population. And so it'll come back down again, and it might actually undershoot and take a while to kind of level off right at carrying capacity. And the reason that that happens is that usually, like babies, don't require as much food as adults. So if a population grows by like 20 babies, it might be able to support 20 babies. But when those babies grow up into adults, the population might not be able to support 20 new adults. It might only be able to support 15. So that's where the overshoot happens. The exponential growth, that's the J-shape curve, is with our R-selected species. That just is like almost right out of the gate, there's this exponential increase in the population size because they're able to reach maturity and grow very, very quickly. They're able to have like so many babies at once. So that's why the population can grow really quickly. But the population will crash back down regularly as well. Usually there is unlimited resources for, say, like bacteria. The bacteria never run out of food, but the environments aren't always super hospitable to them, like if you're using Lysol wipes or something. During the exponential growth, birth rates will always exceed the death rates, which is why it's able to keep growing like that. So again, this is what it would look like on the left here. We've got an exponential growth curve of some yeast cells, and then we've got our logarithmic curve on the other side with the lag, log, and then stationary phase. Okay, that's it. Hope you enjoyed.